Hello, Tom here for Signal Sounds, and today I'm taking a look at Ubique, which is a collaboration between Manifold Research Centre and Heretic machines. It's a 14 HP Eurorack module that combines two of my favourite things, flanging and phasing. On the left is a BBD delay circuit with a range of roughly 5 to 250 milliseconds, which means it can do short delay and chorus type effects as well as flanging. On the right is a transistor ladder 10-stage phaser. They have their own inputs and outputs, but the output of the flanger is also summed to the input of the phaser, and the output of the phaser can be fed back into the flanger via the feedback slider, so you can create an infinite loop of flanging and phasing. It's great for extreme feedback effects and experimental sound mangling, but it can also do some more subtle stuff. In this video, I'm going to build a couple of patches to show how versatile it is. Before I get into the patches, here's a quick overview of the connections and controls. On the flanger side, there's an audio input at the top with an attenuator. The big knob is for the frequency, which controls the delay time, and this also has a CV input with an attenuverter at the top. The smaller knob is for feedback, and this has a CV input at the bottom without an attenuator. There's a dry-wet control for the flanger output at the bottom left. The phaser side mirrors the flanger, audio input top right, frequency and feedback knobs and CV inputs, and output at the bottom right. There's no dry-wet control for this output, it's always fully wet. There's a switch to invert the feedback path, which also changes the frequency range, giving a couple of different flavours of phasing. Finally, the feedback slider in the middle controls how much of the phaser's output is fed back into the input of the flanger. It's worth pointing out that you can use each side independently, but not really at the same time, because the flanger output is wired internally to sum with the phaser input. So if you did want to use the phaser on its own, you need to leave the flanger unpatched, and you need an external molten mixer to control the dry-wet mix. But really the whole point of this module is the strange sonic worlds that you can explore by creating feedback loops using both sides. So without any further ado, let's get patching. Okay, to get started I've got a simple 7-step synth sequence programmed in here. I'm using the Beanie Bunny Moo Moo dual oscillator with one side amplitude modulating the other, just running one side through the rectifier and quiver and then into the crossfader, which is producing AM and means I can play with the relative frequencies. The octave switch to get these quite nice kind of harmonically rich tones. I'm clocking step 8, acting as a sequencer from Contour 1. These are both Duranalog modules, and Contour 1's also producing a nice snappy envelope which is opening the Arbor VCA from Plum Audio. The pre-VCA signal is the green trace, and the blue trace at the bottom is the output of Ubique. At the moment we're just listening to the dry sound, it's going through Ubique. Input fully up, but fully dry. I've got the frequency and feedback all the way down. Let's just bring up the dry wet to the middle. And you can hear at this lowest frequency we got quite a good audible BBD delay in time with this sequence. You can probably also hear a bit of the clock whine if I go all the way wet. There's a sort of high frequency whining noise. That's just the product of the BBD. There's a bit of filtering. As you can hear, the repeats are quite dark. But if we speed up the frequency and bring up the feedback. See, I think they are underselling it a bit as just a flanger. It's quite an effective delay if you don't need really long delay times. And if we bring up this frequency even further, you get into kind of springy territory, chorusy kind of, and then as we go up above 12 o'clock we're into this kind of flanging, lovely metallic sort of squeaks. And you can sort of tune into a resonance, and then your input will start to kind of resonate that frequency a bit with the feedback right up. Let's just back off the feedback slightly and let's try modulating that frequency with a slow LFO for a bit of classic sweepy flange. Just going to take a triangle LFO from Quiver from Wrong Electronics here, and if we turn the feedback up, classic kind of flangy sounds. It's quite nice. Let's just bring a little bit more harmonic bite into the oscillator. Just increasing, going up an octave on the modulating oscillator. And now if I it's really nice at these low speeds we get these kind of little fluttering, springy melodies. Also try upping the speed of this LFO. As we get up into audio territory. Nice extreme effects. We could also try modulating an audio rate. Let's take one of the triangle outputs of the oscillator. Now we get something that's kind of tuned in. Let's add a bit of reverb to this. Could also modulate it with a copy of the envelope. Let's try taking that. That's quite nice. Get almost kind of chord textures as these pitches shift. Let's go fully wet. Quite nice percussive territory with this. We could invert that as well. We've got an attenuverter on the CV input. Let's go back to a slow LFO for now. So just with this flanger side on it, so we haven't even touched the phaser side yet. I've got the feedback slider all the way to the left. We've got quite a great range of sounds, but let's try adding a bit of feedback. Let's in fact take this LFO out. I'm going to tune it into something that's quite relatively static like that. And now I'm going to put that LFO into the phaser CV input. I'm going to keep the attenuator at 12 o'clock for the minute. Let's just bring this fader across. You can hear this extra layer of feedback now appearing. And the interplay now between these two feedback knobs and the feedback slider is pretty drastic. So what's happening is the output of the flanger is going into the phaser, and then this fader is controlling how much of that phaser output is going to go back in to the flanger. So we're getting this infinite feedback loop of flanging and phasing. Let's add some LFO to that phaser. It's quite squawky. Let's have a listen to the phaser output. So this is, we're just going to tap this in the feedback path before it goes back into the flanger. I'm just going to turn down the main output. And this is the sort of dry, or fully wet actually, phaser output. I'm going to pan that to the right. And pan the original to the left. Or the main output rather. Let's just go full wet on that as well. At this point we can take out the input signal, and rather than modulating that with an LFO, let's take the pitch CV sequence so there's nothing at the input now, this is just feedback, and I'm playing with the frequency with the pitch sequence from step 8. And although it gets quite extreme, we can also get some quite subtle tones. Let's try flipping the invert switch, which will change the frequency range of the phaser as well. And if the these feedbacks come down a bit. You get this quite otherworldly just a little nudge of that fader can completely change the timbre. Let's try inverting the pitch sequence. Let's try flipping the invert switch back up. Let's get our original input back in and fade that back up. I'm just going to fade back. Fade back to the dry. Pan that back to the center. And there you go. So just a quick tour of what both sides can do with a kind of straightforward input signal. Okay, next I want to look at feeding noise into Ubique and processing it in a couple of different ways. I've got the white noise output from Quiver, which I'm high-pass filtering slightly using Joanalog's filter rate. That's just off screen up here. That sounds like this. So that's my kind of noise input. I'm taking a copy of that into Ubique, into the phaser side. I'm taking the phaser output into this mixer channel. So if I bring that in and mix the two together, that's the unprocessed noise and the phased noise. And if I sweep the filter, or sweep the phaser frequency rather. This is with no feedback. You can kind of hear what the phaser's doing. If I bring the feedback up, you hear how it kind of exaggerates the frequency. If I flip the invert switch, it kind of changes the flavour and changes the range. Feedback down a bit. Let's try sweeping that with a slow LFO. So this is the triangle LFO from Quiver again. We get this nice kind of jet engine phaser. If I start a little trigger pattern from Eurorack repetitor, which is off screen, and I'm feeding this noise through natural gate, low pass gate here, with a nice short snappy decay. I'll bring that feedback right up. I'm also taking the inverted version of that triangle LFO and I'm just adding a little smidge of modulation on the decay so that as the sweep rises up, the notes get slightly longer. And we get this nice kind of noisy, slightly woody percussion, depending on where we set that kind of start frequency and how much we want to sweep it. Let's just keep it like that. Add a little bit of reverb. Nice. So that's one sound. The flanger side of Ubique, I'm going to feed with that same noise, but just being blasted through a VCA with a very, very short envelope from Contour 1. So I've got another trigger pattern coming in from Eurorack. And Contour 1 envelope here is very short and snappy. I just want a little blast of noise like that. That's going into the flanger side of Ubique, fully dry at the moment. If I bring up the wet dry, got the frequency quite high and the feedback quite high. And if I go fully wet, we're basically doing Karplus-Strong synthesis here, where this little blast of noise is feeding back this nice kind of BBD delay, and we get this nice plucked metallic kind of tone. I've got the sample and hold in Quiver being clocked with the same trigger that's triggering this note, and I'm going to feed that into the feedback, or the QCV, which means every note's going to basically hit a random value. So we're going to get some notes that ring out. Obviously the higher this Q is, the longer the note. Add a little bit of reverb on that as well. And bring in the phased low pass gate percussion. And this frequency down to act as a kind of bass note. And let's bring in a kick drum. Using the kick envelope to sidechain these sounds a little bit as well, just to kind of duck them out of the way when the kick fires. The kick is coming from the Patching Panda Blast, which is off screen. And I've got some hi-hats from the Archer's rig from Shackmat. Also being sidechained from this kick. And nice little bit of reverb. And if we start pushing that fader, the feedback fader, across, the two sides of Ubique will start to interact. Let's take the kick out. And we get these kind of howling feedback squalls, which is quite playable. So all we've got here is a noise source, there's no other synth. And apart from that kick and hi-hat, everything's coming out of Ubique with a little help from Natural Gate. There's quite a lot of parameters we can play with here to keep this little groove rolling along. Now, Ubique obviously has a lot of applications as a kind of effect near the end of a signal chain, but for this final patch I want to explore using it a bit earlier in the signal path, directly after an oscillator, to act as a kind of strange wave shaper before we then go into a low-pass gate. In this case I'm going to be using Natural Gate again, and I'm going to use Mumu's saw wave output. That's going into the flanger side, and it sounds like this. Green trace. So with it completely dry, we're just hearing the kind of raw saw wave. If I mix the dry wet to the centre, I've got a very high feedback frequency just after 12 o'clock. If I play with the frequency like this, I can kind of create some quite interesting wave shapes if you're looking at the green trace. Which are beyond sort of simple distortion. Kind of quite stepped at times. Now let's feed a pitch sequence in to the Mumu. I'm using the discrete map sequencer here, we're giving this kind of odd rhythm. Now of course this frequency and feedback are sort of static. I'll take a copy of the pitch CV that's feeding the oscillator and go into the CV input. It doesn't track volt per octave, but it kind of does kind of follow the curve a little bit and get a little bit closer to a consistent tone. Let's bring the actual low pass gate in, just kind of tame that a bit. So we've got this quite nice kind of percussive tone. Of course it's feeding into the phaser side as well, so I'm routing that into the other channel of Natural Gate. That's the blue trace that's going to be feeding in. And if I start routing a couple of the gates from this sequence to channel B, we're now here in the second gate. I'm in the kind of softer model. Let's just go into a matching model. And let's just mute the left side for a second. So now we're just listening to... So that's the phaser side, with a slow LFO modulating the frequency. I'm going to go to the softest model of all. promise to be quite percussive. I'm going to pan these two slightly left and right now, and I'm going to whack this feedback fader across. If I was to open the natural gate here, you'll hear some pretty extreme, wild double feedback distortion, but when they're kind of tamed by this LPG, if we play with these, we get this really interesting, very organic percussion kind of sound. Now, obviously the natural gate's doing a fair bit of heavy lifting here, but still feeding this kind of atonal, inharmonic source material in really lets it shine as a sort of human sounding percussion voice. Let's just try transposing the sequence slightly. You can change the character by playing with the flanger frequency. We max both feedbacks and the slider. In fact, let's go full wet as well on the left side. Now we're losing as much of that saw wave as we can. There's still this kind of fundamental frequency there, but really like these kind of jerky rhythms we're getting from the discrete map as well. So you can really just turn a saw wave or anything at the input really into this beautifully rich inharmonic building block, which you can then shape like this. Just pan back to the dry. Now just got the saw wave on the left and a slightly phased version on the right. If we pan this dry wet over. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully this has given you a little flavour of what Ubique can do. I've been really blown away by it. I've been playing with it for the last week and I just keep finding these kind of sweet spots. It really rewards experimentation, and there's a lot it can do beyond just being a kind of flanger and phaser effect. As a sound design tool, I think it's quite almost unique, I think. Anyway, thanks for watching. Do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave a comment and leave a thumbs up. Love to hear from you, and I'll be back again soon, so see you next time.